everybody. Welcome to Called Up the Prospects podcast. I'm Chris Peters, joined by Cam Robinson of Elite Prospects, as we are every week. And Cam, I think it's safe to say this is the fastest growing podcast in the hockey prospects space because people are listening and they're watching and they're enjoying, and we're getting a lot of great feedback, and we love all that feedback. But Cam, how the heck are you? I mean, we are in the thick of it right now. Is your head spinning? Have you gotten any sleep? What's happening with you right now?
Don't put any limitations on us, Chris. We're the fastest growing podcast on earth. I think we're just gonna take over, right? No limitations here. Yeah, I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. This is it, right? This is I thoroughly enjoy working on 3 different major projects simultaneously. Right? Start a little bit of this, a little taster of that. It's like a charcuterie board of draft preparation and work. And I'm having a great time.
It is. There's a lot happening. There's a lot going on. There's going to be plenty that we're going to talk about. But today, because this is the fastest growing podcast on planet Earth, as you said, we wanted to give the listeners a chance to chime in. And so in a little bit, we're going to get into a Q&A. We're going to talk about mostly the NHL draft, but we were taking questions about pretty much anything. Got some questions about the NCAA CHL recruiting race, CHL expansion, lots of other things like that. We've also got some questions about some currently drafted prospects that fans wanted updates about. So we're going to talk a little bit about everything here. And of course, as we do that, Cam, it's all thanks to our pals at Wonderful Pistachios, the presenting sponsor of Called Up the Prospects podcast. Wonderful Pistachios. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. You're going to hear a lot of pistachios talk in this podcast because that's what our Q&A is going to be all about. But again, before we got into that, I wanted to remind you, if you haven't yet subscribed to this podcast on your audio app of choice, Apple Podcasts, Spotify seem to be where most of the people are listening to this podcast. So if you are on either of those platforms, make sure you're giving us thumbs up, a like, a 5-star rating, written reviews. It all helps. We've seen our podcast go up the hockey charts a bunch in the last couple of weeks. You guys are the reason for that. So we appreciate all the feedback and glad that most of it is positive. Not all of it is positive. We're going to get into that eventually. Next time we do a mock draft, we were going to dive into the comments and kind of squint at it and see what it all looks like. But that is all on the horizon, Cam. I mean, you put a call out for questions. I put a call out for questions. We got dozens and dozens of them. So we had to narrow it down. And I thought the best way to narrow it down, Cam, was since we've got our friends at Wonderful Pistachios, you're right. It is the only way. Our friends at Wonderful Pistachios have been so gracious to sponsor this podcast. We are going to use these questions in several categories, and part of it is how we're going to answer them. Part of it is how they were asked. But let's just bear with me for a second here. So all these questions are divided up into 3 separate categories. We've got the spicy category, which, hey, you're having some jalapeno lime pistachios. You're having some chili roasted pistachios. It's a little bit spicy. There's a little bit of heat. The answers are where I think the potential is for some spice there. Or the question was asked in quite a spicy way, which we enjoy. Now we've got the salty questions. Now, our friends at Wonderful Pistachios, they've got all sorts of varieties of salted, unsalted, lightly salted, however much salt you want to put on it. But we've got some of those there. It's just got a little extra something to it. Maybe there's a little bit of a kind of a backhanded compliment. Maybe there's a bit of a little twinge of skepticism in this. That's where we get our salty questions. And then we have our unsalted, no shells questions, which is basically kind of a little no frills, a little bit more of your garden variety, a little normal. But, Wonderful Pistachios, they're unsalted, no shells. They hold the salt, but not the flavor. So that is what they say about that variety. And that is what these questions are going to have as well. So without further ado, Cam, for the first time ever on Called Up the Prospects podcast, I give you our listener Q&A, and we start it off. And I'm going to pick this one because we got to start it off with spicy. If I tease spicy, we got to start off with spicy. And this is a spicy one from our friend Beckett, who sent this question in via Twitter/X. Possibility of the Sharks taking Porter Martone over Michael Misa at number 2? Cam, I turn the floor over to you. That is a spicy question. What say you, my friend? This is also assuming that Matthew Schaefer is off the board at number 1.
Yeah, maybe he's not even, eh? And they're passing
exactly.
on Schaefer too. Okay, so that is spicy. That's you know, you need to have a beverage handy when you're taking takes like that. I don't think it's likely. I think that they, despite having Celebrini, having Smith, they've got a couple of really talented centers there. You just move Smith over to the wing and you take Michael Misa, and you're off and running with your Celebrini Misa combination, just terrorizing the Western Conference for a decade plus. But I will say, Porter Martone, you know, at the Worlds right now, got jumped in a little late there when Bo Horvat went down. Now we see in action. Now we're going into the medal rounds. If he could really, you know, maybe find a way to play more than 8 minutes a night, but off the fourth line, but if he could make an impact, he has that unique combination. We've talked about it before. He's big, he's strong, he's maybe one of the best playmakers, if not the best playmaker in the class. Great hands. He could be a very unique piece, something that you don't find too often, really difficult to find. And if you could just get him to be like a caveman a little bit some of the time too, and just gaga smashing guys with a club, then you could really be cooking. But I think it's quite unlikely. But on draft day, nothing is out of question. Not too many people had Beckett Seneca going at 3 last year, you know, at least a week or two before the draft. That was not projected. So we could see something crazy like Martone going ahead of Misa.
Yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility, right? I think there's always, everybody's doing their due diligence right now. They're going to go through the combine. They're going to have their meetings. They're going to have a lot of different conversations. I agree with you. I just think that you're leaving a little too much on the table, a little too much offensive pizzazz, a little too much scoring potential in Michael Misa. If you go with Martone, I think there's fewer questions about Misa's overall compete level. I think there's fewer questions about the dynamic elements of his game. He's certainly a much, much, much better skater than Porter Martone in my eyes. And that's another factor. Obviously, Martone has the size. You bring that into the mix. You think about some of the other guys they have in their system that are on the way, some bigger wingers. I just think that, you know, in all likelihood, Will Smith ends up probably sliding over to the wing. He's playing the wing for Team USA at the World Championship right now. And then you've got a Michael Misa to help be now you've got 3 high-end offensive assets that are at the center of your entire rebuild here. So I think it's a question worth asking, a spicy question worth asking. But let's throw a little salt on it, because we're going to keep the train rolling with Porter Martone. And we've got a salty question from Alex. And Alex would like to know, I've seen Martone drop down the rankings through the year. What has made him drop? Martone seems like a tough player to play against, that's physical and gets under people's skin. Is that a type of player that should be taken before some of the faster, more skilled players? So, Alex, a good question there. And just to recap that a little bit too, Cam, is that Porter Martone kind of came into this season as a guy that a lot of people were talking about with James Hagens as the potential guy to take over, you know, be his biggest threat for number 1. As the season has progressed, that obviously has not been the case. But let's break this down in Alex's question. He's, you know, so why is he dropping? Why has he dropped in your eyes? Because I know he is a player we were both very high on coming into the season. And I'd also say, it's not a big drop. It's not a significant drop from where you're at, especially when we're talking about the other players that are kind of in the tier that Martone is in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna be a little salty in my response here. I don't think he's dropped. I don't think he's dropped. I think, you know, like you said, we've projected him coming out of that U18s last year as being like, this guy's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 forwards taken in the draft. Well, guess what? He is very likely to be one of the top 2 or 3 forwards taken in this draft. He's going to be number 3 on my board. But if some lists did have him sliding, I think, and I brought it up a number of times, I think that is going to be the case of skating. Okay, not a burner. Gets around just fine though, just fine. But it's that inconsistent fire, I think, is what some teams might be like. Are we getting a power forward? And I've brought this up to team side people. I brought it up to you, Chris. I've talked, is that there has been, you know, at times a little nagging, a little whisper in the back of my mind when I'm watching Martone being like, Is he what a lot of people think he is? Is he a true power forward? Because he can drop the mitts, he can bury guys sometimes, but his overall style of play isn't all that physical for being such a big, strong guy. And quite often you either have that or you don't. You know, you look at like a guy like Victor Eklund, who would kill to have Porter Martone's size, the way he plays the game. He plays, similar to like a Seth Jarvis, where he's involved in everything, but he's 5'10" and 176 pounds. It's really difficult for him to be able to transition like that, where Martone's 6'3", he's going to play at like 220. It's like, go ahead and run everybody over. So I think the teams are a little questioning about that. They do recognize that maybe he's not going to be the power forward that some teams estimate. And that could be why he ends up slipping past number 3, slipping past number 4 potentially. And he's a winger too, right? And we've got a load of centers. This is very much like 2017, tons of centers at the top.
Yeah, I think positionality is a big reason why you're seeing, it was about more of the centers elevating as opposed to Martone dropping, if you even want to call it that. But I like it. We have some saltiness in the question. We have some saltiness in the answer from one of our co-hosts, and I don't really have much to add, but we do have one other Porter Martone question that really doesn't really fall into the spicy or the salty category. This might be our first no shells, unsalted version here. This one comes to us from Mel, and Mel asks, where do you see Martone playing next year? So perhaps the answer could be spicy, depending on what you will say, Cam Robinson, and I will be intrigued to hear your answer.
Can I be like super spicy and say he's going to go play pro in Europe? Just because I will say is that, I'm trying to be all over the CHL to NCAA, and I'm, asking around stuff. And I did hear that a few pro clubs over in Europe were kicking the tires on Porter Martone there earlier in the season. Very, very unlikely. If I'm guessing though, I'm saying he's playing at the University of Michigan next year.
Ooh,
it's far from locked in, but that's just, if I'm going to put something out there, if I'm going to put my neck out a little bit, I'm going to say, I think he ends up in the NCAA, and I think he ends up in Michigan.
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility. The one thing I'd say on the European front is the reason. So like the one thing he doesn't have to worry about between Europe and Canada is with the NCAA is there's no transfer agreement. So there's no, totally. There's no transfer card. Now, that's not to say that he would be denied that opportunity. Hockey Canada would have to sign off, and so would his team if he were to go play in Europe because of their contractual rights within the CHL. And that's more of a double IHF thing. It's not really, but it can happen. Like, Austin Matthews was kind of that unique individual, but Martone would be a guy that kind of fits into that category of age appropriate / so that's an interesting one. That would have been super, like that is super spicy. I tend to agree with you. I think that it's less likely that NHL teams see him in their lineup next season. If he does sign an NHL contract, that would take the NCAA off the table. However, it's going to be part of that discussion when he's at the combine, when the team drafts him. And I think he'll be one of those players that says, you tell me where you want me to play and I'll go play there. And that's kind of what I think will end up happening. And the NCAA is very much an option. There have been rumors, some of them very unsubstantiated, but there's been rumors about him and Penn State. They do have Luke Misa now. But again, these are rumors and nothing is specific. So thank you for the question about that.
Well,
Yes. I think there's a lot, that's the thing is the University of Minnesota has been exceptionally quiet on the CHL front. And we'll see exactly if that holds or if they are going to dip their toes into that salty water. And since we're talking about salt anyway, let's go with another salty question. And we go back to a Michael Misa question. And I think I felt a few hints of salt on this question from G. Taylor here. So G. Taylor asks, why has Misa participated in very few tournaments representing Canada compared to others of his skill set? Well, Cam, I'll let you go ahead and take this one. I mean, there is a definitive reason. It's not some conspiracy theory reason, but I'll let you go ahead and maybe dash a little extra. I don't know if there's salt to dash on it, but yeah.
Yeah, this one might just be just informative. So wasn't at the U18s last year as an underager because Saginaw was running all the way to the Memorial Cup. Wasn't at the U18s this year because he got dinged up in the playoffs. Wasn't at the Hlinka because he chose not to be. Wasn't at the World Juniors because Dave Cameron made a bad choice. And I'll just put that all on Dave Cameron. But Hockey Canada made a poor choice. What am I missing? What am I missing here? I think I got all those boxes checked.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's pretty much
the world.
I mean,
because he's just not.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing is like, Porter Martone for why is he at the men's world championship? Well, he was not initially registered to the team's roster, and it was kind of like, hey, you're here, you're probably not going to be on the official roster. We're going to see. We didn't expect to get Sidney Crosby and Nathan McKinnon and all these other guys. But they put Martone on there because he was, physically able. He could play in the pre-tournament games. It was good. They wanted to get him the experience. He did play in the World Juniors. So he's kind of, is it 100% merit based? No, but it's also, he's a good soldier, and they're like, hey, he's going to gain a lot from this experience. And that's where it went. Now he's in their lineups because they have a couple of injuries, which is great for him. But as far as Misa goes, I think, the fact that he did choose not to go to a second Hlinka Gretzky, that was a big part of the decision not to go. Was I already played in that tournament once. I'd rather focus on getting ready for my draft season. And for like the way he started, I was like, maybe he made the right call. Like, how much there's been a lot of argument about how valuable or not valuable the Hlinka Gretzky Cup is in terms of a lot of things. But if it does anything, it extends a draft eligible player's season by more than a month. And so it's kind of like you are absolutely, now you're in and you have to be at the top of your game in August when you're really supposed to be building throughout. So it's kind of a tough thing, but that's why Misa was not at as many Canada tournaments as he could have been. He was invited to this year's under 18 Worlds, but I bet, ended up being a little too dinged up to make it happen. But I believe we're expecting him at the Combine though. Is that right, Cam?
We are expecting him to be a full participant at the Combine. Yes. So that little injury that he got in the playoffs, not going to affect him. Yeah, no, he'll be testing and all the interviews. Yeah.
All right. Time to get spicy, my friend. Get a little salt. Now it's time to get spicy. All right. So our next question comes from Nomad94. Mm-hmm. We talked about this a little bit last week, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more. Who is your biggest faller in this draft and why? So Cam, I will send it to you to kick this one off. Your biggest faller in the draft. Who is tumbling down the boards?
I've got a whole bunch of names here that I think could slip. It all depends on what we're considering a faller. Like some people think Jack Ivankovic is going to go in the top 25, and I'm like, see you round 3 there, Jack. So Cameron Schmidt. We've talked about him before too, that the public sphere has him ranked, kind of in the 20s, where it's like a bunch of NHL teams are like, yeah, I'll take a flyer in the middle round. So another one likely, but if we're talking some bigger names, I think there's a world. Roger McQueen, I mentioned it before, had a team that's picking in the early teens. In the teens, mentioned if he slides to us, we're letting him slide right by. This is a guy who, has been talked about among the top 5 or 6 prospects. And the other one, and I don't think it's likely, but I think we could see James Hagens just take a little kick down that board further than many people would like to see. Somebody coming into the year as a first overall pick, presumptively, now where it's like, hey, he's probably going to go by 4, maybe 5, maybe 6. If he fell to like 9 or 10, it wouldn't shock me. It would be incredible value for whoever nailed him at that spot. But I do think that there might be the helium is, getting sucked out of that balloon a little bit, and he's just slowly coming back down to earth. I think Hagens could be one, but again, I don't expect it, but I think it could happen.
I think it could too. And in our mock draft, he fell quite a ways, right? So I mean, it's always a possibility. I think there are definitely teams that could stop that slide at any moment, whether it's Nashville, whether it's one of the other teams that like Seattle, whoever it might be. But that if we're talking Seattle, then we're talking like 8, so that would be much lower. Craig, our friend Craig Button also, I think, got people's dander up with having Hagens 8th on his list, which I thought, as we all do this. We all have our own opinions and everything, and that's Craig. So, it's not, and I don't think he's the only one with that opinion. So, very interesting there.
Corey,
as far as my biggest,
did Corey drop him at 11 though? Oh, sorry, I'll just jump in. Did Corey put him at 11 recently?
Yeah, so Corey had him at 11 on if you were ranking them by playoff potential.
That's right.
Like
that's right.
How you play in the playoffs. And so I have told Corey, and I told him this on the Athletic Hockey Show, that I disagree with that assessment. I think that there is, I think that some of the players he had over him, while maybe are a better fit for the playoffs per se, they're not better players, and therefore they're really not better at that. So like that's kind of the whole thing is like, I look at different players when we talked a little bit about Matt Duchene and how he's played for the Stars, and it's like, is there a world where that's the kind of career arc of a James Hagens? It's possible, but I think that's kind of in the discussion. But yeah, I mean, really, at this point, I still think that people have missed the boat on how good Hagens still is, and focused a lot on the production not being at Celebrini and Fantilli levels, but being ahead of Brady Tkachuk, ahead of Matty Beniers, other players that have played college hockey in their draft season. And Hagens was younger than a lot of those guys as well. And so there's a lot there. But in terms of my biggest follower for this.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So one of my biggest followers is a guy that I think probably is a victim of some overrating at the beginning of the season and that's kind of been corrected. And that's Charlie Trethewey, who was being talked about as the first round draft pick among American born defensemen here. I don't think that he will be picked in the top 2 rounds. I'm not sure that he'll be picked in the 3rd round. I think there are some significant concerns about his overall hockey sense. He is a tremendous athlete. He looks the part, but I think the under 18 Worlds was yet another reminder when he kind of started falling down and not having the same kind of ice time as guys like Blake Fiddler, who came in from the outside. And so I do think that Trethewey is a guy that is going to slip perhaps further than we expect him to. I think on a lot of the public lists, you'll see him still very much in that 2nd round, 3rd round kind of conversation. I think that that's a player that a lot of people are out on at this point. Even though there's such a tremendous base of tools, it's just, again, it comes down to a hockey sense conversation. And I think that that's true of a lot of the players that were in that mix at the NTDP this year. There have been players that kind of hovered around that 1st round draft ranking, but really never justified that either. So I think that that'll be one of the bigger fallers that we'll see relative to kind of how he's been viewed throughout the season. So
can I spin? Can I real quick?
Yeah, I'd love for you to
quick
spin.
Here. Just when you're saying all that about Trethewey, and it's so true, right? Is that when a player has these expectations coming in, and then they don't meet them, it's like teams are, like you said, a lot of teams are just out on that player. Whereas if he was completely unheralded and had maybe a very similar season to what he had now. He's got decent size, excellent 4-way mobility, right? That he's got all these tools.
Yes.
But the IQ's not there. But if he came kind of out of nowhere and teams are like, look at this toolsy defenseman, maybe we can work with, maybe we can get the IQ. And it just like completely changes the narrative. And so like, it's like, maybe look at that. He didn't start with first pairing stuff because he didn't have that pedigree. He just kind of played the middle pairing role and played it well enough. And then teams are like more interested, and he might get drafted a little too early versus it just gets flipped.
Right.
And I just thought that was something interesting to point out. And sometimes it's tough for these players to live up to those expectations. And at the end, it like craters their draft stock.
Yeah, absolutely, Cam. And I think that's the other thing too, is like we think about how when you attach a number to a player, and that is even after they are drafted, how much more pressure is there on a 1st round draft pick? And we talk about all these 2nd and 3rd round guys that have grown. Well, they did it away from the spotlight. They did it away from the pressure. Yeah. No one was talking about them. And then all of a sudden they had this amazing season. You think about different guys that fall down draft boards and then have this incredible bounce back season. It doesn't mean that they were picked in the wrong spot. It doesn't mean they were picked in the right spot. I mean, there's a lot. It's just a process to go through. And we are all going to put one out But when we say there is a way too early top 10 or top 20 or top 30 for the coming year's draft, we mean it.
We mean it.
It is too early. It's what it says right now. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, if player X doesn't reach it, because I mean, coming out of last season, I thought Trethewey was certainly looked the part of a first round defenseman. And here we are now. So it's an interesting place to be. I want to say too, like, I like the player. I think there's still potential there. I just think that it's expectations versus reality, and reality didn't quite meet that this year. All right, let's get a little salt on this, because I knew we were going to get a lot of questions from Blackhawks fans, because it just tends to happen, and they've seen enough mock drafts now where Anton Frampton is going there. So this one comes to us from Ovi Clapbaum, and Ovi's got one for us here. If the Blackhawks do go down the Anton Frampton route, how long until he makes an impact on their roster? Where do you envision Frampton's future role with the current Blackhawks team? All right. Cam, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with this one, and then I'm going to kick it over to you, because I do think there is a world where Anton Frampton is the pick. I do think that there's a chance that he goes to the Chicago Blackhawks. It's not guaranteed. I think there's still a lot to be figured out. They just hired their head coach, Jeff Blashill. I don't know how that impacts what their philosophy is going to be. Probably not a lot, but basically Frampton kind of fits in when he's at the very top of his game. And I think that that's where a lot of scouts are just saying, if he's that, then he is a top 5 pick. But as you and I both know, we've seen, there is nothing safe about that, because he hasn't shown that consistently over 2 seasons, really. He did get hurt at the beginning of the season. That changes the dynamic a little bit. But if let's say, just to answer Ovi's question, if the Blackhawks go down that route, how long until he makes an impact on the NHL roster? He's going to play in the SHL next season. I think that that's a good step up. As we've seen, some players have not managed that step very well when they went from Allsvenskan to SHL. We saw it with Dalibor Dvorsky. He ends up coming to the CHL, gets himself right back on track, had a really good season in the AHL this year, got some NHL games. I think if you do take Anton Frampton, you're waiting for at least 2 years on that player, just because unless he has that big season in the SHL next season, that I think is very difficult to project out. I think it could be go play in Sweden, come play in Rockford the following year, then you're on the Blackhawks. I don't think there's any reason to rush the player. In terms of what I think his role could be, if you are reaching the very top of his projection, the top of his projection would be the number 2 center behind Connor Bedard, which, again, people are like, well, if you're picking top 3, you should be drafting a number 1 center. Well, not if you have one. If you think Bedard is a long-term center, which is another factor. And this could be a little bit of insurance towards that, where if you believe that there's a little bit more two-way value, there's a little bit more physicality and strength in a Frampton, and he can be a bit more of a table setter, but he's more of a scorer, I think, than he is really a table setter. So I mean, I know, we've gone back and forth on him, but I think now that, teams are starting to get, these are discussions that are being had. What say you on this one?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's a multi-year wait. Some people were hypothesizing that, hey, maybe he could just come over right away. Now, he told us in no uncertain terms, he will be playing for Djurgården next year. And then, if that transition over to the AHL and then up, but it says until he makes an impact on their roster, like an actual impact on the roster, I think we're talking 3-4 years. Now, I do like the way you were spinning that, is that, if Chicago's not 100% convinced that Bedard is a center, taking a center adds that insurance policy versus taking a guy like Porter Martone, where it's like, okay, Martone and Bedard seem to stylistically fit really, really nicely with the bigger body, the slick playmaking, the great handles of Martone, the electric finisher of Bedard. You kind of reverse the roles there. Now your winger's making the plays for you. You can't really take a James Hagens or a Desnoyers because they're not very big. So now you've got a Bedard on the wing, and then your first line center is not huge, and you don't have any other big centers coming down the pipeline. Chicago's probably the team that is most upset that Roger McQueen was injured all season and didn't just have this monstrous year in the dub, that they could be like, let's just take the 6'5" guy. And if Bedard stays in the middle, great. Now we've got a huge second line center. If Bedard moves over to the wing, great. Now we've got a huge first line center. So I do think that. So, but ultimate upside, I think you spot on there is that he's potentially a second line center, potentially a second line winger, potentially a complementary first line winger if he landed in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of potential and a lot of risk. But at the same time, it if you believe that he can consistently play at the top of his game, it's tantalizing. I mean, like it is intoxicating to see, when, hey, if he could do that, he could be a star based on the way that he played this season. All right. Now, some people might say this is a little spicy, but this also involves Frampton and involves James Hagens. I gave this an unsalted no shells because I think that anything is possible here, and it wouldn't surprise me. And there's nothing really surprising about an unsalted pistachio without any shell. It tastes good. That's what it is. So this one comes to us from JP, and JP asks, what would you say the floor is for Frampton and Hagens? Could they fall to the Bruins at 7, and would they take either if available? So it's a very interesting question here from JP. And I think that, as we were talking about with Hagens, the floor is undetermined a little bit. But what do you think? How far do you think it's possible for either one of those two guys to go?
Are we talking floor of where they could fall to, or floor for their projection? Because if we're talking floor for their projection, I honestly think that like Hagens' floor is one of the highest in the class. Like I think with his speed, his skill, he plays the middle of the ice. His shot is good. It just didn't convert a ton this year. I think Frampton's floor is pretty high too, right? I think it's a third line center, right? So there were a couple guys with the highest floor in the draft. Now, if we're talking about their floor and where they could fall to, I think that the drop zone is further for Hagens than it is for Frampton. Despite where he's going to be on my board, despite where he's going to be on our final board at EP, I'd be surprised if he was there at 7. I'd be surprised if Frampton was there at 7. Whereas Hagens, I think he could be there at 7 or 8 or wherever, and Boston would be they'd be a terrific pick for them. James Hagens at 7 would be an amazing pick for Boston, I think.
I agree. I think the value is too good there for them to potentially pass it up. I mean, we did our mock, and we had a lot of different kind of configurations to it a couple of weeks ago. And I do think that if Hagens was there, the value is too great potentially for Boston to pass up on a kid that they'll be having, right under their nose. It wouldn't be a reason to pick the player, but it is helpful.
Sometimes it is. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it helps a lot. So that'll be an interesting one to follow. All right. I got to spice it up now. We have to spice it up. Oh, and by the way, yeah, so just to finish on JP's comment, we're both in agreement. If he is there, take James Hagens. If you're the Bruins.
Take
highest upside.
Even though I don't think I mocked him. I don't think I mocked him there, though. Yeah.
No, we didn't. We left him there to get picked up the next pick after. So so it's possible. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get to the spicy stuff. This one comes from Clean Hits. How much of a reach would it be for the teams in the 4, 5, or 6 spot to pick Brady Martin? Could you be talked into their justification for taking him that early? He seems like the perfect mammoth. Ooh. All right.
Does he?
I mean,
does he?
They like their big. He's not big. He's not huge.
Yeah.
6 foot, but he's very strong. He's very physical.
He hits like a big boy. Yeah.
He hits.
I think
he hits to hurt.
I think that would be a very spicy reach. And you're talking to a couple of Brady Martin's biggest fans here. We really like the player, but I think you're leaving a lot of pure skill and pure upside on the table if Utah went up and grabbed him at 4 when they jumped up 10 spots. There was you asked me a month ago, and it's like they could have sat at 14 and probably got Brady Martin. Now things change, right? He was good at the U18s. He was good down the back half for the Sioux. But I think we need to just temper expectations on him. Is that He's going to be a very good player. He's going to be an impactful player. He's probably going to be a player that everyone hates to play against, playoff performer type of guy, the way he plays, but he's not 6'3", right? He's going to be able to do some things at the NHL level, but he's probably not going to be as physically dominating as he is against junior age players. So if that separating factor is gone at the NHL level, is the skill, is the smarts, are they high enough to justify that pick? And in my opinion, no, they're not.
Yeah, I mean, I think top 10 is realistic. Top 6 is a bridge too far. Yeah, so I'd say that wouldn't be the pick to make there. And I think that there's so much potential in what the Mammoth could add, that having a guy that's probably going to top out as a middle of the lineup player is not where you want to be at number 4. Especially when you've had such tremendous luck with the lottery. You're like, like, I don't think you can pass up those opportunities. No. All right. This is, again, this is kind of spicy-ish. I'm interested to hear yours, but this is kind of related to that last question. Who is your collective dark horse riser? This one comes from Bedard to Nick Lardis. At first I thought this was about from Bedard to Nick Lardis. I'm very confused, but either way, who is your collective dark horse riser for this year's draft? Anything like a Seneca scenario? Are we gonna see a Beckett Seneca kind of scenario in this draft? Are we gonna see somebody disrupt the whole dang thing? You got any spice for that, or do you have any, or are we gonna just have to go unsalted on this one in terms of our collective dark horse here?
Well, it's hard to say dark horse, right? Because like anybody doing a Beckett Seneca, it's like, Seneca was still going to be a top 10 pick, and then he just jumped up to 3. Right. So if we're looking in that kind of lens, I put it out there 2 or 3 months ago, is that I think that Jake O'Brien is a sneaky guy to slip into the top 5. He's slight, he's slippery, he has terrific playmaking, right? A little bit of a power play merchant at this point. If I could convince him to shoot the puck more than once a game, then all hell could break loose too. So, but there's just a lot of runway with that kid that I know some teams see it too, and they're like, hoo. We've heard the comps. Could this be Elias Pettersson 2.0 sort of thing, where it's like needs some work, needs to strengthen up, needs to add that shot. But the vision, the handles, there's a lot of stuff to like there. So, Jake O'Brien's one that I've identified, and Keishon Aitchison too. I think that he could just be that guy that all of a sudden springs up and is the second D off the board. And if a team wants a D badly enough, that could be, at 7 or something like that. It could get crazy and get that high too. That could shift the tides. But, as far as getting into that top 5, I think Jake O'Brien's a sneaky one.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, in terms of getting into the top 5, I think it's going to come from that collection of players that we've kind of clustered after Misa and Schaefer. That includes Hagens and Frundell. O'Brien is a bit more in that mix. Martone, for some, McQueen. It's just kind of that's kind of the blob. But my guy was going to be Keishon Aitchison as well. I think that there's a real chance that he's going to be go ahead of one or a couple of the centers that we've been talking about that could go early in this draft. He's a very physical, aggressive defenseman, and he scores in bunches. And I think the teams want to work with him and continue to develop that scoring talent that he has. So that's going to be a guy to keep an eye on as the draft picks start flying. All right. So I'm going to go unsalted no shells because we're going to move down the draft board. And as you get down the draft board, it just gets a little bit less spicy, a little less salty. It gets a little bit more, not necessarily predictable, but either way, this is one that we've got here from Adam. And Adam is asking, and we've mentioned this defenseman a little bit earlier. Adam asks, Cameron Reed is a defenseman I've seen ranked pretty consistently in the top round, often over Blake Fiddler. I haven't had the opportunity to watch Reed, but what's the intrigue with him? And is that 20-ish range accurate? Cam, I turn the floor over to you because you mentioned him before. What do you got on Cameron Reed?
Yeah, he's an interesting player. He's a smaller defenseman, an offensive defenseman, constant activations, like loves to activate, loves to orchestrate plays, can work the power play. Now, he's not overly creative, right? He's not Zane Parekh. He's not Quinn Hughes level skating. So the real job for Cameron Reid is to be less Niels Lundqvist and more like a better version of Cam York. That's kind of where he needs to find his identity at the next level, because he's not big enough or fast enough or like super offensive enough to be like, hey, he's just going to be the next in the wave of Quinn Hughes, Lane Hudson, these undersized defensemen that just jack points. He's not that level of talent. So he's a risky pick, I'd say, around the early 20s, because we've seen loads of those players fail, right? I mentioned Niels Lundqvist.
Right.
You can go as far back, Julius Honka, Adam Boquist, right? There's been just you can litter your floor with all these smaller defensemen that didn't have elite tools. But I do like him. I think he has skills, and he's got some jam to his game too that hopefully will bring with him, and that he can play at the NHL level, but he is a risky one.
Yeah, and he's got some of those things, like shoots the puck pretty darn well. He gets a lot of pucks through, a lot of pucks directed at the net. So, like that's helpful, and he's intriguing. He did have much lower production during the postseason. 14 games, 5 assists, whereas he had 54 points in 67 games. Intriguing player, but I'm with you. There's not a lot that gets you excited, and it kind of speaks to the uncertainty of this draft class, and that players that have some of that track record that Reid had this season are going to jump into those kind of ranges where maybe, in a lot of drafts, maybe he's not a first round pick. He doesn't necessarily excite you as your pick if that's a player that you're picking in the first round yet. Again, as you mentioned, like he's developing, he's adding more elements to his game, he's getting stronger. He's not quite as small as the Boquists and guys like that. He's kind of similar, in size to some of the guys, the more average sized offensive defensemen. But yeah, I think it's tough. And the other defenseman that was mentioned in that question was, if you had to pick between him and Blake Fiddler, where do you stand on that one?
Well, I mean, if you're looking for likelihood to play 400 NHL games, give me Blake Fiddler, right? He's 6'4".
I agree.
He has great stopping potential. He's got NHL bloodlines. There's just so much more going for him. It's just maybe the IQ and the top end, right? Is that like Cameron Reid could maybe be a second pair guy, like with his skating and his ability offensively. Whereas like Fiddler, I think is pretty safe bet to be like, he's going to be like a 5. He's going to be maybe he's a 4, maybe he's a 4, but he's probably just a 5, right? Which is fine, especially if you're picking at 24 this year or something like that. But again, we talk about it is that like in different years, it's like, I feel good about taking Blake Fiddler at like 38, 40, 45, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great. I think that, and I think that's, that was definitely an interesting question there about a certain player. Let's get to a salty one. You want to get a little salty? Because I feel like there's a little salt dripping from Joel's question here. Joel asks us, what is it that is keeping Jack Mertag out of the top 20 on most boards? He plays with pace, intensity, he has good hands, good release, he has sneaky playmaking. Joel wants to know, why are we not putting Jack Mertag? Now, really quickly, I'll say I had him at projected kind of mid-season on a list that never saw the light of day because I wasn't finished. As a late first round pick. However, I mean, now we also have the benefit of more time and a really tough showing at the under 18 World Championship, which I think gave some pause about his overall upside. Cam, what do you got on Jack Mertag out of the National Team Development Program? He was one of their better players throughout the entire season, probably one of their more consistent players, yet didn't have the best last impression.
Let me ask you this, Chris. What's your favorite flavor of ice cream? What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?
I'm a big vanilla guy, so.
You are? Well, that's perfect. We did not plan this at all because I am not. I want some like peanut butter in there, maybe a little chocolate swirl, chuck some brownies in there, some Netflix and chill. I don't care. But he's a little plain Jane. He's a little vanilla. To steal a quote from my good buddy and coworker there, Daniel G., excellent scout, he hits the intersection of size, effort, and simple, straightforward attacking. Nothing fancy, pretty vanilla skill set, pretty decent offensively, pretty decent defensively, just fine. If you want to take him at 32, if you want to take him at 40, it's fine. It's fine. But he's not going to move the needle. He's not going to excite. He is a great pick for you, Chris Peters, as a vanilla lover.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I definitely like Jack Mertag. I think that he plays a brand that can be helpful. I just think, what's the top end? Where is the high end? Where is the flash? Where's the dash?
Where's the peanut butter?
You don't need all of those things, but if you're going to be a producer, like, is the skill at a high enough level where he could be a top 6 guy? No way. Like, it's really hard to project that out. Could he develop into that player? Maybe down the road, but yeah, that's a tough one. I felt there was a little bit of salt in there. Somebody saying, hey, I don't agree with the public list, and that's totally fine. We all have different opinions, and there is a team or 2 or 3 probably that are going to consider Jack Mertag in the first round. I just think that it's fewer now than there was maybe before. All right. So after that one, let's go with this one. Actually is spicy because I think the questioner is being a little spicy on this one. And this comes from our pal Soft Serve Scouting. And this question is, what do you think of Ben Kindle? Where's his ceiling and projection for you? How close is he to the consensus top 10 in the class for you? So is he anywhere close to the consensus top 10 for you, Cam Robinson, I ask?
Consensus top 10 in 2025? Never heard of it. Never. I don't know about a consensus top 10. Hey, what's that? Someone point me in that direction. I'll pass it along to a few teams too. I'm sure they'd be dying to know as well. No consensus top 10 this year. Soft Serve, if that's who actually. Yeah. But I like Ben Kindle.
That is your real name.
It took all of Yeah. It took all of 15 seconds for him to show up for Canada in Texas down there and be like, whew, they just added some skill. They just added some speed.
Yeah.
He's darting a slider forward, but he plays a really proactive game, I would say. Like he tries to be the main character, right? So he'll initiate contact to create space for himself while he has the puck. He's not afraid to get in there on the forecheck. He plays a robust game for his size. He's smart. I think he has lots of good skills. Consensus top 10? No, not at that level. I think that if we're looking at pure ceiling, yeah, there's a world. He's really smart, that he could be one of these guys that kind of breaks the mold and beats his size, but I'm not betting on it. I think he's going to be more of a complementary piece kind of in that middle 6, that he doesn't have top line juice, but I hope I'm wrong because I do like the kid too.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun to watch. And I think that there's, it seems that anybody that is now coming into the draft that is 5'10" or shorter is starting to get the Seth Jarvis and everything. Who's the next Seth Jarvis? Where can we find us a Seth Jarvis? They're really hard to find. I don't think that Ben Kindle is that. I think that he is in this class with the skill, hockey sense, and playmaking ability that he has, and the enough quickness. I think that he's definitely got a chance to go higher, possibly in that first half of the first round, but I don't think, he rises to the level of some of the guys we're talking about in the top 10. All right. This is going to be our last on the 2025 NHL draft questions. And this is an unsalted no shells version because this is typically what comes later in the draft. However, we'll see how early one of these come. And this question comes to us from Justin. And Justin asks us, which overager do you think gets taken the highest? So which overager do you think gets taken the highest? What do you got for me?
I've got the correct answer is what I have for you.
Let's go.
And it's Christian Epperson. Okay. It's Christian Epperson. Yeah. He's a draft +1, creative, detailed, got skill, already proven capable of playing with high-end talent. Him and Misa ripped it up together. And I think that there was long stretches there where Epperson was, driving the bus for a lot of it too. He did really, really well. He has physical runway. I think he has the potential to be like a really solid second line supportive type of player who can create. And obviously, he's going to have to continue to be able to create those advantages at the pro level, but he's off to Denver. That's going to be a good time. He's going to get some good lessons there. He's going to learn some things, round out his game, flesh out the game there at Denver. It's Christian Epperson. I actually think that he could slip in. He could be a little Tanner Pearson. Maybe he goes at the very end of round 1 as a draft plus.
Yeah, very interesting, and that is the correct answer. I have no other, in terms of reentries,
No.
there's nobody that's that exciting. But this is a guy that went to the CHL before the ruling, came down, and was like, I guess I'm going to go play the OHL now, and had 80 points this season. Now he can go to the University of Denver and have a grand old time there after a year with the Saginaw Spirit. So that is the correct answer. All right, so we are going to move on past these next few questions that we have. So we'll try and get back to them a little bit later. We're going to go to our NCAA and CHL questions, because a lot of people have been asking a lot of things. We actually got more questions than I was able to put on here. I think the questions that we are getting on this topic are, a lot of them we're going to try to provide information, but a lot of them, there's a lot of uncertainty. So I'll just going to say that off the top. Like, really, there's still things that we don't know and can't know. There's still stuff to be sorted out in the collective bargaining agreement. It does sound like there's going to be some meeting of the NHL, NHLPA, and various stakeholders to suss out what happens when a player goes from the CHL and they're on expiring draft rights and then go to the NCAA. The PA, I don't think, wants their draft rights to continue to go with them, because they were drafted out of the CHL, and that's a 2-year. It's already collectively bargained. So that's going to be interesting. But that's where we go, and this, there's going to be a lot of players that are moving along. So our first question is coming from James, and James is asking us, which 3 prospects do you see having the most to gain from the CHL NCAA shift? So, interesting question. We don't know who all is going officially yet, but Cam, do you have thoughts on this one? I certainly do, but I'd love to hear yours first.
I got all sorts of thoughts. I will just say that I checked in just yesterday with some team side people about, what's going to happen with that. And, everybody kind of thinks it's just going to be 4 years across the board, whether you're drafted the CHL, the USHL, NCAA, right, whatever. You're just going to have 4 years. But I did have one guy say that some people do think that it's going to be 2 years. And I was like, whoa, that would be pretty spicy. That would be some spicy pistachios if it ended up being 2 years. Yeah. You go back for a sophomore and all of a sudden you're free to bounce. Woo-hoo. That'd be a scary proposition. But as far as prospects who have the most to gain from this, I mean, let's just get the first one out of the way here. It's Gavin McKenna, right? He's done all he can do at the CHL level. It's time for a new challenge. It's time for an opportunity to live in the weight room, maybe fly around and get some lobster dinners rather than run the bus in Medicine Hat. If we want to just, can I say Landon DuPont when he leaves after next year? And then can I just go Maddox Schultz the year after that? I think it's all these super, super elite players that are going to reach their ceiling, what they can accomplish at that level, and need a new challenge against older competition with state-of-the-art weight facilities and training and all that stuff. And then the next group of kids that really need it are the ones that aren't quite ready. They're 19 and they just dropped a 100-point season, but it's like they can't go play in the NHL next year, and they, don't want to go to the AHL, or they can't go to the AHL, I should say. It's that weird little hybrid zone. It's like, okay, new challenge, play against older players, not have to go and fight my way through. Or if I am 20, but I'm not quite ready for the A and I don't want to go play in the coast, those type of guys, right?
Right. And I think, so it's interesting because I think, yes, this is going to benefit the top players in that way, where it's this buffer, right? It's this extra step. I'm not going to get too specific on players, but I am going to say that I do think that this is also going to significantly benefit the late bloomers that are undrafted, guys that this gives them more tail to showcase themselves at a level that is competitive, and yet they should be able to make an impact sooner. So if you look across the board in college hockey, the vast majority of commits are guys that have aged out of junior hockey. This is a lifeline. There are very few players that have gone to U Sport and signed contracts out of U Sport. They do exist. There are a number of them. but they are much fewer than the ones that are coming out of the NCAA. So the prospects that are going to benefit the most are the guys that thought that their NHL dream was over once they turned 20. These guys are going to go into bigger programs. They're going to have a chance to play a substantial role pretty early, and they're going to be able to showcase themselves at a level that is going to be extremely visible to NHL scouts, pro scouts, amateur scouts, and team personnel. That is a great way for them to get discovered, get an opportunity to sign. We see it every year, dozens of players in the college free agent pool. Quite frankly, I sometimes wonder how they have earned an NHL contract. Yeah. But now I think some of these players are going to be better. Yeah, exactly. Good for them. Yeah. But again, I think the pool widens for that now, and teams will definitely be more aggressively signing that. So I know that's not specific, and maybe that's my unsalted, no shells answer, is that, hey, we've got this situation, but I do think if you are a late bloomer, that you are going to benefit from this path. So that is going to be really interesting. Also, by the way, Bowling Green State, head coach Dennis Williams, coached Canada at the World Juniors, coached in the WHL. His incoming recruiting class is almost exclusively aged out CHL players. So, so like teams that like Bowling Green and others, like they're trying to level up quickly, and they're giving these guys big roles right away. So that's a chance for them to prove themselves. So keep an eye on that.
Speaking of Bowling Green and all their 20-year-olds, though, Leslie just got traded from the Giants to Kelowna, right? Wasn't he supposed to go to Bowling Green next year? Now we're going to see the battle go back and forth, right? Then now it's like, right. Hey, NCAA, quit just robbing all our players. We'll put you on a Memorial Cup host team. Stick around. Hey, come on back.
Yep.
Was it Masden Leslie? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing is that recruiting is never going to stop for these guys. You will have to recruit them while they are on your team. It's crazy. There's a lot going on there. All right. Let's throw a little salt on this because it was interesting. Kevin Dubé from Le Journal de Quebec had an article recently where he had the QMJHL commissioner on the record. And so this question comes to us from Alex, and I think this is related specifically to that. Any insight on the rumors that the QMJHL expansion into New England? I'm going to start off on this one because there's smoke there. The QMJHL absolutely wants to expand into New England. Where it is complicated is that USA Hockey has territorial rights and has the ability to grant or not grant further CHL expansion into the United States. There is going to be a conversation at some point among all these stakeholders, and I think the NHL is going to be involved as well, to find the path forward. And that may include expansion into New England, but I would say that I would be skeptical it happens soon. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm skeptical it could happen soon. Markets that they've talked about, Manchester, New Hampshire, which has had AHL, ECHL. It's had various levels of pro hockey. And then also there are a number of places in Maine and others that could be options. So geographically, it works for the Q to add a couple of teams there. But USA Hockey, I think, is going to be pretty strict about what it wants going forward here. In conversations I've had with people around junior hockey, there's not a huge appetite to accept any further expansion into the United States. We've heard about Muskegon and Youngstown trying to go into the OHL. We've heard about all these other things, and I think the NHL at one point even kind of got involved and kind of told everybody to, hey, can we pump the brakes and figure things out first before we start going all over the place with expansion and moving across borders. The IIHF is the governing body for USA Hockey Canada. They have guidelines for this throughout Europe, and it also plays in North America. But all the teams that you see in the United States that are CHL teams had to be approved by USA Hockey before they could start operations there. If they were within, the era of, and most of them have come in after, there was that governance. So It's possible. I think it's going to take time, and I think that there is a lot of negotiation. I would say it's not impossible, but there's a lot of negotiation. Cam, any additional insight or anything else to add on that front? Because I do think it's a sensitive topic in the United States right now, CHL expansion, especially considering the number of players that are deciding what to do for their next moves.
Yeah, no, I think you covered that perfectly. You've been at the forefront of that stuff too, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well, and it is, again, there's so much unknown, and we're going to find that out as we go forward. So, all right, there are plenty more. We'll talk much more NCAA CHL. We'll probably talk about it a lot more after the NHL draft, but wanted to get a couple of those questions in. And now we're going to go to some drafted prospects to sprinkle in here. And we're going to go to this one from Robbie, and I think he directed this one to me just based on the fact that he said, you saw the Iowa Wild a lot this year. Is the blame on Jesper Wallstedt's season mostly on him, the defense, or all of the above? Jesper Wallstedt had a horrific season in the AHL. There's really no way to sugarcoat it. He would tell you the same thing. I'm not trying to trash on Jesper Wallstedt. I think that he knows as well as anybody that this year just wasn't good enough. And I do think that, he was in the AHL. There are a lot of teams that make the playoffs. The Iowa Wild were not one of those teams this year. They did not really come terribly close. They stayed in it mathematically for a long time. What I think is interesting about Wallstedt's situation is that I think he went into this year believing that he was going to likely be part of the Minnesota Wild roster. That didn't happen. And now you're in a situation where Marc-Andre Fleury has retired. Gustafsson is the number one, and Wallstedt didn't seize the number two job. I don't know how you can give it to him off of this season, which is something that is going to be difficult to bounce around. But Cam, I did want to ask you too. I mean, I think everybody's to blame. And the defense wasn't good in front of him. The team wasn't good in front of him, and he wasn't good enough. And that's a bad mix. Obviously, all that goes in. I have not personally given up on Jesper Wallstedt as a prospect because the tools are absolutely there. The circumstances have not been great. He should be better than he has been, but I haven't given up on him. And Cam, it's always tough with goalies. We're going to have ebbs and flows. He's been in a bit of a couple of years where it's been so here, and he hasn't taken that step yet. Yeah, ebbing. Yes,
too much ebb.
The ebb to the flow. He is. Yeah, he is on the ebb at the moment. But any additional thoughts on Wallstedt? I mean, this is a guy that is a top goalie prospect, yet seems like he is starting to fall a bit behind his peers.
And there I was on draft day making fun of the Edmonton Oilers for passing on Wallstedt.
Me too.
But when we should have been making fun of him for passing on White Johnston, right? That was the one we should have really been razzing him for. They blew that. But yeah, no, ugly season for him. I mean, the guy's played 3 years in the AHL now, 100 plus games. He's a 900 save percentage, right? He's turning 23 this year. Yes, when you draft a goalie, even in the first round, you're probably waiting a long time on him. But I'm sure the Wild are like, dang, that one is not looking like it's going to break right, at least not for their organization probably at this point. He needs a monster comeback season now. He needs to go out there and step up and, through the first 3 months, put up like a 925 and be like, I am ready for the NHL. Get me out of Iowa. Get me into the show. I need minutes up there too. They might just put him up there because he is turning 23. He will be 23 next season. And it's like, well, we put that draft capital on him. We better try it. We better push it. And then if he can't handle it, back to the A he goes, and probably on waivers after that. So it's been a tough ride for him so far, but I'm like you. He's so good in Sweden in the juniors and in the SHL and internationally. Yeah. It's like, it's hard to forget those. Those are anchoring viewings that we've had, and they stay with you. And it'll probably stay with some teams too. If he ever hits the trade market, is they'll be like, we could fix him. Be like that bad boy boyfriend that you need. I can fix him.
I love it. All right. So we move on now to, after a dominating season, is Berkeley Catton the elite talent the Crackin desperately needed? And so got Matty Beniers, got Shane Wright, but is Berkeley Catton the guy? Kenneth would like to know.
He's the most skilled, pure skill. Yeah, he is the most skilled. I do worry about him a little bit. The way he dominates junior is in a junior type of way, if that makes sense. You know, he's not dominating like you would see someone to be like, man, that's like Kasper Halttunen right now. Like, you don't say like, oh, he has a pro level shot. No, he has a professional shot. Like, he has one of the better shots you'd have in the NHL right now. You know, you watch Eric Lindros destroying the OHL back in the day. It's like, that is a man playing an NHL game against junior kids. Berkeley Catton plays a junior game. He just plays it exceptionally well. So I am going to be looking for if he can bring that with him to the NHL level. I do like Berkeley Catton a lot. I do think he's a highly, highly skilled player. He's just not that big. He's going to need to be insulated and have to have a coach that runs a scheme that really emphasizes flying in on the rush, lots of rush chances, lots of rush opportunities, and that he needs to be kind of the focal point and have things run through him for him to be that impactful at the next level. Not unlikely, but I wouldn't say super likely that he's going to be a superstar either.
Yeah. I'm not going to push back on that one. I think that's well said. All right. Okay. So our last question, little unsalted, no shells, because it gives us a chance to season this however we choose. And I like this question because it does allow us to kind of go back in time a little bit.
Good.
So Sam would like to ask this question of the two of us. Historically, what was your best long shot prospect call that actually hit? And what did you see in them that made you a believer?
This is good.
So Cam, we get to yeah, you go first. I want you to go first.
Okay. We get to do the self back pat now, which is, and since it was queued up for us, we don't look like jerks. Okay, I like this one. I saw this one, so I did a little thought on it. I'm just going to hammer off a few that I felt really good about. Jake Gensel, ranked him in the 20s. He went in the late 70s, multi 40 goal scorer. He was too skinny. He was a little. He get kept to the outside, and I was like, no, this kid's dynamic. He's going to be dynamic. Brock Faber had him at 20, went in the late 40s. The skating and the IQ, I was like, this guy's going to be a stopper for sure. Pavel Dorofeyev, ranked him in the early 20s, went in the 80s, 35 goal man, big, had the shot, just good, projecting, but I projected that it might look right. And then this one's not so bold or anything, but I had Quinn Hughes at number 3, and I kept saying he was the third best player in that draft class, but I still was wrong because he turned out to be the best player in the draft class.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny how that works out. Very funny. I'd say the biggest one is actually probably a complete mistake by me, because it was from my first list that I ever put out publicly. And I had Pavel Buchnevich as the 15th overall pick in 2013. He went 75th, and has been, done. Been in the 60s and 70s a lot. I had the fortune of being at the under 18 World Championship that year. I had a chance to see him in person multiple times. He had 11 points in that tournament. You know, he had a frame that you thought he would grow into at that time. He also had this just elite shot. Everybody was kind of looking at Valery Nichushkin, but before Nichushkin got there, Buchnevich was leading that team. And that was, so it wasn't really a mistake that I had him that high. It was more just, by sheer being lucky enough to have been traveling for that under 18 Worlds, which was in Sochi, which that was an experience. That allowed me to kind of see, and this was when, really we were only a couple of years removed from Nikita Kucherov going in the second round, despite being one of the best U18 players I've ever seen at the World Under 18 Championship. So Buchnevich is one that I'm still pretty proud of, just because it was like early on in my career where I was like, I think there are elements that this guy has. But I was also so young in my career, because don't look at the top of that draft board and see Nathan McKinnon third overall. So we all have our mistakes and all.
Who had one? Who was at one? Who was
Seth
it?
Jones.
Seth Jones?
I had Seth Jones at 1, and I had Drouin at 2, because I was like, I thought Drouin was the next Patrick Kane. Thought it was the next Patrick Kane. I was was Drouin
ahead of Mac. Yeah.
Anyway, that was early on in the career. Yeah. But the other one more recently, and this isn't a long shot, it's similar to kind of yours, is when I was at Daily Faceoff mid-season draft, everybody had Shane Wright number 1. at midseason, just before the World Juniors, I put Logan Cooley first. Everyone, nice. I took so much heat for that. Everyone's saying I was an attention hog. I was only doing, and it was really, I promise you, I have never done a ranking. I might do a mock draft to get a little extra attention, to add a little spice to it. But my rankings, I don't do that with. And now we don't know. There's still a lot to play out. Will Logan Cooley be the best in his class? It remains to be seen. I think he's on track to be better than the guys that went ahead of him. But that's I think he is right now better than the guys that are ahead of him. But again, like, you think about the consensus, and sometimes we get stuck in that too, where it's just like you see different, you kind of get caught in groupthink and other things like that. And that was one where I just felt I had watched so much of Shane Wright, so much of Logan Cooley. I watched a good amount of Juraj Slafkovsky, but probably not as much as the other two. And I think I did have Uri third in that class. But really, that was one where it was like, stick your neck out a little bit. And then I stayed with it through the half of the season. I kept Logan Cooley at 1 at the very end. And that was one where I felt pretty good about it. But the Buchnevich one, it feels like maybe I fell into something there, but the Cooley one, I felt like that was worth the work.
No, you take that. You plant that flag. You are Buchnevich. Yeah.
Yeah. And people say, well, Pavel Buchnevich is kind of a middle of the lineup. No, he's a pretty good hockey player. So,
what?
But anyway. Yeah, I know. And he's definitely better than a 75th overall pick. So we got that going for us.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, so normally we would have our other segments, but because we wanted to get as many questions as we could, we just don't have time for Beyond Belief, or you have to pick one. But we do have to thank our friends at Wonderful Pistachios. We just talked about a whole bunch of varieties that you can enjoy, but we want to say a special thank you to them, our pals at Wonderful Pistachios that have been the main sponsor of this podcast and will continue to be, and we're looking forward to that. I want to remind you that pistachios are known for their protein, power, fiber, and better for you unsaturated fats, for a combination that may help you keep you feeling fuller longer. One day I will get that ad read right. Sorry, Wonderful Pistachios. We love the pistachios much more than I can read, apparently. So anyway, Cam, before we get out of here, let us know what is coming up on Elite Prospects as we inch ever closer to the NHL draft.
Well, I just dropped the big scout executive poll finally yesterday, picked my spot and dropped it. I think that if you haven't already read it already, I just got Mitch just sent me a message saying it's one of our most clicked articles and it's only been out for 20 hours. So that's exciting. But go and check it out. Some spicy quotes in there from some execs and scouts, some definite spice. You want to check that out. Working on the mock draft right now, not going too clickbaity, not yet anyways, not going too wild, but the big news here, and it's consuming everyone at EP, is the draft guide, right? We did our big final ranking meetings. We did not film it this time, which was spectacular for us. We were chirping each other like crazy. People don't get to see that. I'm sorry. We might have got canceled, a couple of us, for some of the chirps, so that's good. Just kidding. It's all very PG. So that the draft guide, it's coming very soon. Schedule, I believe, first week of June, maybe June 2nd. And then, Chris, we're off to the Combine, right? We're going to start hammering some good content there. I just spoke with James Hagens yesterday and his coach at BC, and I got a big Hagens piece coming. It's, like I said, many projects simultaneously on the go. How about you?
Yeah, things are percolating, man. Well, we're really focused in on the AHL right now. The Calder Cup playoffs are getting closer and closer to the conference finals. We'll also have the Calder Cup finals here on FloHockey, so make sure you are subscribed for that. It has been an absolutely outstanding postseason. Hey, it is in play that we could have an all-Canadian Calder Cup final with the way that Abbotsford and Laval have been playing so far in this season. So there's a lot on the line. An all-Canadian Calder Cup final in the American Hockey League would be pretty fun and maybe spicy for some of you. But I think that's been a big thing. Are you really? You grew up in Abbotsford?
I'm from Abbotsford.
I did not know that.
Well, I left when I was 7, but yes, born in Abbotsford, spent my first 7 years there. Okay. There's a little soft spot there for those Abbey Canucks.
So yes, and Abbotsford, boy, have they shown up for that team. Some of the greatest environments I've seen in the postseason, both Abbotsford and Laval. I mean, those fans are unbelievable. So make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss any of that. Follow everything on FloHockey social media as well. So many highlights and different things to follow and catch up with the Calder Cup playoffs. If you want to see a glimpse into the future of what some players that will soon be making an impact in the NHL, Calder Cup playoffs, a great way to do that. I was just at Game 5 of the Clark Cup Finals in the USHL. That is over. Make sure you get all of the recap content. Tynan Lawrence, we'll have a story coming up on him as well. Big time 2026 prospect who had a tremendous USHL postseason. We will talk about him and the champion Muskegon Lumberjacks, but a lot more to come. A lot of NHL draft coverage, a lot more on Called Up the Prospects podcast. We are only ramping up. We're getting ready. We've got the combine coming up it's just getting closer and closer. It's all starting to happen. It's all almost there. But Cam, thanks a bunch, man. This was fun. We're going to definitely get more questions from our listeners in the future. You guys ask great questions and you are so dialed in, and we want to say thank you again for helping us grow. Want to give a huge shout out to Greg and Amanda for producing today, stepping in for our guy Ever, and also a huge thanks to everybody that has been tuning in, sharing the podcast, and letting us know some feedback. We value all of it. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Called Up the Prospects podcast. I'm Chris Peters for my pal Cam Robinson. That's going to do it. We'll see you next time.